Welcome to the Driving Change podcast on the Evergreen Podcast Network, where we live at the intersection of neuroscience and storytelling. If you love great stories and you love understanding the mindset it takes to be a world-class change agent, then join us as our fascinating guests from all walks of life unpack their unique journeys of perseverance and passion, of expertise and experience, and be inspired to use your own story to drive change. Well, welcome back to Driving Change. I'm your host, Jeff Bloomfield. And today, before we dive in, a big thank you to our season sponsor, Brain Trust, that was recently just recognized on the Inc. 5000 list of fastest growing private companies. Shout out to them. If you want to learn how to communicate more effectively as a leader or a seller, go to braintrustgrowth.com. Now, today, my guest is someone who truly embodies resilience and innovation, both professionally and personally. Matt Garretson is a Yale graduate with a law degree from Salmon P. Chase College of Law and a master's in theology. Wow, that's interesting. I'm sure we'll unpack that a little bit. Over the past 25 years, he has reshaped the legal services sector by founding companies like Garretson Resolution Group, Signal Interactive Media, Burnbright Legal, Process Outsourcing, and Jane.ai. He served as a neutral administrator in a high-profile settlement cases similar to, you might know some of these if you were following along in the news, the World Trade Center disaster site litigation, Deepwater Horizon, and NFL concussion settlements. His goal was bringing fairness, transparency, and data-driven solutions to complex legal matters. Now, that sounds like a bunch of gobbledygook, but we'll get into that. That'll be fun. But I'm also really interested in getting into beyond his legal achievements. Matt has dedicated time and resources to developing systems for nonprofits, special focus on improving well-being for vulnerable youth and their families and communities. And then he's got a little bit of a crazy gene. He's also an adventurer at heart. He's completed a 1,000-mile Iditarod Trail Invitational on a fat bike and conquered the Continental Divide bike route, proving that grit and perseverance are far more than just professional traits. They're really part of the way of life for him. Matt, you're like the Forrest Gump of entrepreneurship here. It's an honor to have you on, and you're cut from a different cloth, and I can't wait for our audience to get to know everything about you and how you might be able to add some value to them today. So thanks for being on.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So the first question that my listeners are obviously used to hearing is they want to get to know you a little bit. So tell us a little bit about your origin story, where you come from, the early days of Matt, and how you evolved into this mega change agent that you've become.
Oh no, I grew up with a wonderful family, kind of a middle class Midwestern background. Was born in Louisville, Kentucky. My father worked for a steel company. My mother was an educator. And, both of them had kind of major influences on the interests I had in my life, which, from my dad kind of getting this like real desire for adventure, from an early age, his mindset. And I should say, Kentucky and Hamilton, Ohio run deep in my family. And so there's a lot of outdoors. There's a little bit of chip on the shoulder from where you come from. But my dad is the kind of guy, if you asked him to buy you a moped, he would save all his money and buy you a motocross bike. If your friends had BB guns and you wanted a BB gun, he would buy you a shotgun. He was always like
next level.
There's always a next level to it. And so from that mindset, I was early into racing BMX, playing football, learning how to rappel and rock climb, and just the stuff that a risk taker with a risk taker for a father, you would learn to do. And then on the other side, you had my mother, who was a writer, an educator, a real intellectual, who really wanted to find balance in her children of doing the things that, that followed in my father's footsteps, but also balancing it with a real love of education and learning and curiosity. And so grew up in that environment. It wasn't without its problems, as every family would have, but when you look back and connect the dots as to how they shaped you, I would say it was really those two kind of attributes, this risk-taking and adventure, education and curiosity throughout my childhood, and that led to the time I lived in Hamilton, Ohio, the time in Westchester, Ohio, kind of coming with a chip on my shoulder from a public school to really trying to please my mom and dad at the same time. Like, how do I play football and go to an Ivy League school? That type of mindset. So that's the background.
Isn't that fascinating? Like how where we come from matters so much in good and bad ways, right? We all carry a little bit of junk in our brain trunk from our upbringing, but we carry a lot of good traits as well. I think that even sometimes unhealthy environments instill in us a lot of values that help us get to that next level and where we're trying to go. And you just did a perfect blend of both of your parents. They were able to deposit some pretty cool characteristics into you.
Yeah. Yes. Definitely give them the credit for those kind of oddball lanes I run in.
Now that the idea of going on and then pursuing, so you went to Ivy League, went to Yale. When did you decide that you had a love for law, for the legal?
It really, one of my father's brothers, he came from a family of 5, as I mentioned, in Hamilton, Ohio. It was just a Main Street lawyer in Hamilton that really distinguished himself, and I watched him solve problems and do some wonderful things in a small community and really become a reputation that was outsized of that community, in terms of being recognized nationally for some of the great skills that he had. And he really took me under his wing as I was contemplating what I wanted to do, and introduced me to, going on from a background in political science and economics, undergraduate, to pursuing law. That bug really didn't take hold in me until I was out of college, and I married my high school sweetheart, moved home. We'd started a family. And so I actually went to law school a little later than life, and in an untraditional way. I had wanted to go to law school, but also had to pay the bills and take care of a young family. So I went at night at Northern Kentucky University, which was an amazing experience. So you go from this kind of noted Ivy League experience to grinding it out at night law school with people who had to make some sacrifice to go. And it was like a really practical, it's like what a juxtaposition to go from this kind of ivory tower learning for the love of learning to a practical, I'm going to go at night school and learn because there's something I want to do to make a living, and I'm going to go, and scrap it out there. And I'll tell you, like, of all the people I've had the blessing of working with in life, I'll tell you, I've worked with some of my colleagues from the Ivy League undergraduate, and I've worked with some of the colleagues from my night law school. And by and large, I will tell you, I'll take those night law school scrappers 2-to-1 because they're just such amazing people to be pursuing a dream and at any cost trying to figure out how to do it.
There's something about that in there that we're drawn to those types of people.
Yeah.
And I think we probably know inherently what it is, because you got something at risk, something to lose, nothing's been handed to you. You just got to go get it done.
That's right.
Now, what was it that then obviously the timing of the parallel of the theology pursuit? You got a master's in theology. I mean, you went from one law to another law, different type of law.
There's really 2 elements to that I can trace that to, and I think about it a lot. One is that, I didn't grow up in a religious household or a household that attended church, or a household that really beyond Christmas and Easter celebrated religious holidays. My wife, on the other hand, has a deep faith, and just intrigued me because she found peace in situations I could never find peace in. She found forgiveness and people that I could never find myself forgiving. And in that, I just, I really wanted to discover the basis of her kindness and her, her empathy. And so that really sparked this interest in learning about faith and learning about religion, and also learning about all types of religions, because similarly, I saw people from other faith backgrounds who just had this wonderful peace and this wonderful outlook on life and this wonderful desire to make change and do good in this world. And it's kind of the mindset of like, well, if I want to really learn it, I'll just go back and study it, and get really serious about it and immerse myself in the topic for 4 or 5 years. And so I was able to go to Chicago Theological Seminary and enroll in their master's program to do that. I will say and I mentioned there was 2 influences. One was, of course, that family influence, or my wife's family and her background. But the other was in some of my early work in the legal profession, one of the first jobs I had out of law school was administering the settlements between several of the archdioceses throughout the United States and the victims of sexual abuse. And so, like, during the same time, I'm getting this curiosity because of the positive things I saw about faith and religion in my wife's walk through life. I'm also seeing all these horrible things that were occurring in organized religion, and I just wanted to reconcile it. And so I guess it's the way I'm programmed. I immersed myself for those 5 years and went at night, went back and forth to Chicago from Cincinnati, where I was living at the time, and received my master's.
So this is another case of powerful, like, juxtaposition. Seems like that juxtaposition in your life is a consistent theme that seems to keep coming back.
It is.
What would you say that during that season of your life, what were some conclusions that you drew between that? Because that's such a stark difference between a wife filled with faith and compassion and grace and forgiveness, and then this kind of man-made legalistic religion that was causing great harm to people at times. Like, well, how did you reconcile that, and what did you learn about your faith in that process?
And it's something I still struggle with today, but I think if you were to take away years of learning and coming from a non-faith tradition to studying all these different faiths and religious backgrounds, I would say that my takeaway is to shape kind of a theology by which I want to live my life, and in no way suggesting that any religion's got it right or wrong. But I do struggle at times to reconcile this notion of, saved by faith alone, and also the desire to do good in this world and to say that, actions matter. And if you have the capacity and you have the time and the talent and the treasures to really act on your faith during our time on earth, that I believe, and again, I'm not in any way saying this is a teaching or that anyone's religious belief should be backed by this kind of doctrine, but what I believe is for me to have life-changing faith and to see myself as a Christian, I have to take action on my faith. It's hard to do every day, but when I look over the course of my life, I want to see that I put into action efforts to make the world a better place because of my belief, rather than just saying, well, by faith alone, I'm okay, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that's that old adage that faith without works is dead.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you're essentially saying, which is
100%.
Pretty cool. So as you kind of made your way through that season of your life, when did you know that you were going to be an entrepreneur? Because I think maybe you did at a young age, maybe that you were the guy out there selling bike parts off your motocross to somebody. Like, I don't know. Like, what was it that you clicked and you're like, I can do a lot of this stuff by myself. I can start stuff.
I part of it was by necessity and part of it was by desire. Like, on the necessity part, when Jill and I got married, married my high school sweetheart, we met in the 6th grade, dated through junior high and high school, went off to separate colleges, came back, got married, and lived in our hometown. That wasn't necessarily the route that a lot of my peers had taken out of college. And, so I came back, found a job in Cincinnati, and just felt like there was something unfulfilled in that experience. And I thought, applied to a couple of the big companies in Cincinnati, didn't get a look for whatever reason, didn't fit their profile. And it was kind of that old adage of, if you can't find a way, make a way. And I had that mindset of like, all right, I feel drawn to something a little bit non-traditional. And as I was beginning to think about like, all right, how am I going to go to law school at night and work during the day, earn a living, I found an area within the law that was somewhat unexplored, which is more of being a neutral administrator of these kind of an emerging topic in law were these major class actions and mass torts where two parties there'd be some bad event, like I mentioned, the sexual abuse cases within the church, or you could think of oil spills, or you could think of pharmaceutical products that had adverse side effects. In our civil justice system, the ability to settle those at one time and resolve those cases one time was relatively new 25 years ago. And what it presented is this issue of like, all right, if I'm the defendant and I want to pay some money and walk away from all these claims, it's like, who's going to be the neutral to figure out how to divide the money? And so I began while in law school, doing independent studies about like, what would that look like if there was a neutral administrator that could handle those types of issues. Now, it wasn't novel. There's been neutral administrators throughout resolution of civil issues in our justice system, but within this very specific area of what's called mass torts, I was one of the first to think about that. Like, what are we going to do to make sure that there's no conflicts, that there's a fair way to treat similarly situated people similarly. And so I set out to kind of design a system to do that, and then almost immediately got an opportunity from some lawyers that I had known and had asked me to work alongside them in some early cases involving the church or involving there's a product called Fin, which was a diet drug that was back in the early 2000s. And so just thought of a way to approach those issues and got my first job doing it and said, you know what, I think I can build something out of this. And over 25 years, built a business that's all we did, is handle these types of mass disaster type of cases as the neutral.
Now, was correct me if I'm wrong, was the BP oil spill kind of one of the first really big ones that you guys worked on?
Probably the first big one that people would commonly know, which predated the oil spill, was the World Trade Center. In that matter, the many first responders sadly developed respiratory injuries and cancers from working on the pile of debris that sadly followed the disaster. And so got hired to come in and build a methodology and infrastructure for evaluating those claims by the people that were injured and finding a fair way to compensate them. And so that led into doing the same type of work with the cleanup workers for the BP oil spill, and then dozens and dozens of pharmaceutical cases and other type of environmental exposure cases.
Wow, it's so fascinating. That's just a world that most people don't even know about, right? That's happening they know the headlines of something happened, but they don't understand behind the scenes all the different nuances of what's happening.
Yeah, I think one of the ways that I describe it for people with a business background that think of it as a very small, nuanced area is, about 2.5% of our gross domestic product in the United States is the movement of money in some type of legal resolution.
Really?
When you look at all the lawyers involved, and now that could, the parties involved, like our civil justice system moves a tremendous amount of money between someone alleged to be wrong and someone expressing some type of injury or harm. And so it sounds nuanced, but it's actually a huge marketplace.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I knew a little bit about that just from my days in biotech on the pharma side, but I had no idea it was that large of a percentage. What are your thoughts on today? Like we've given so many. I'm gonna put you on the spot here. We've given so much protection to many industries that allows them to avoid some of that accountability, including in some cases the pharmaceutical industry. Has that gotten better or worse since your time handling those cases?
I think it's it's moved up and down throughout 25 years, but by and large, I think the system works, and I think when an, there are enough individuals claiming injury, and there are that enough these cases emerge throughout the country that eventually kind of the writing becomes writing on the wall is hard to ignore. And if there are undisclosed features or harmful attributes about a product, eventually the parties will come together and there'll be some resolution. And so while there's been talk of tort reform, or sometimes there's talk about fraud on one side of all these class actions, or that businesses need more protection from it, I think that's good because on balance it drives stuff more to the center, and that the cases that should be resolved ultimately in our civil justice system, I believe, do get resolved.
Now, do you think that, because I was curious about this because I knew a little bit about your background before, coming out of COVID, obviously the big debate has been on the vaccine and versus the vaccine injuries, and every country has a different philosophy on what they're doing and not doing. With that, is that something that you think is going to come to fruition? Because they've been held to no account at this point. And is there a need for that? Is there not a need for that? Is it overblown? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
I don't know. I think it's too early to tell. I think at the end of the day, science prevails in these types of arguments about products and the liability. And a defendant or a manufacturer is never going to say it was as harmful as the people claim, and the people who are making claims on injury will say that it was always a compromise and they didn't get the full kind of quantum of what they deserve due to the harm they experienced. But at the end of the day, if the science is there, our system will discover it. Our civil justice system will discover that, and some compromise will be made. But a lot of those types of the data that drives that scientific discussion in certain instances could take decades. So long and short of it is I think it's too early to tell.
That makes sense. I'm also curious your thoughts on, because this is right down your lane, right? You're at the end of the day, you have this passion for people and serving the underprivileged, and yet there's a side of you that's for justice and accountability. And I think that's what I love about what you've done in your life. And again, the juxtaposition is that word between those two things. When I think about the narrative today with someone like RFK, he's trying to ride this rail between holding the food industry accountable, holding medical industry accountable. Yet at the same time, the general population feels like we're just in the dark. We don't know when there's been people that have been doing something nefarious behind the scenes and feeding us poison versus when there's been transparency and it's overblown. I'm just curious, like someone like you that has looked at, you've seen so many of these different types of cases, and you look at that combination between the greater good versus accountability and justice. Is someone like RFK good to reset some of these systems, or is there more stuff happening behind the scenes than we know?
Oh gosh, that's I'm not a fan of political discussions of what's best for our bodies, whether it take it in any direction you want to go. So I think without judging RFK, I would just say I personally am not a fan of any of this being politicized.
Yeah.
I believe in the integrity of the long-standing institutions that, and the people that work really hard to get data out there. I think there's some things some organizations that are above the politics, and that's where I go for my information. I'm not in any way suggesting anyone should do. I mean, it's just what works for me. Right now, I think we live in a culture that it's certainly something where people have to do their own homework on anything from my perspective that has to do with medicine and our bodies. I don't think we can listen to politicians for that type of guidance.
I think that's such an important thing. And I know I talk to a lot of people and listeners, and we can move on to a different topic, but I'm just always fascinated by someone with your experience, opinion on this. Where does one, and I'm not asking you to give us your sources, but what I hear a lot is where does one go for truth anymore?
Yeah.
Because they know that the politicians aren't going to give it to them. And so then you're kind of competing with, okay, well, what are the sources that are actually above the fray here?
Yeah.
And that's a tough, I think never before in my life have I felt so conflicted, because I hear so many good people from all different walks of life on different sides of the aisle and different perspectives, all kind of throwing their hands up in the air going, I don't know what to believe anymore.
It's interesting. Like, we have a challenge, kind of take it outside the political space to just even helping parties resolve conflict, right? So at the end of the day, our organizations, let's say we're working with a manufacturer of a product that's done good in this world. They have a wonderful reputation as an organization, but the stats are what they are. There's many people being harmed or claiming harm on account of their product. And eventually the science kind of suggests that maybe their product is causing harm, but they still need advocacy, right? And so like our role as a neutral in these is like to advocate for a process that's fair and balanced. And so one of the things we do in all these projects is, we can't rely on the pleadings of the parties at conflict because they're positional.
Yes.
They're so the thing that we do, and what we have a good reputation for doing, is building a panel of information sources and experts to get our own information, so that we can help navigate, like where is a common ground. And I think the lessons I've learned from that, and it's like almost, people talk about it in terms of negotiation strategy as well. It's like, we know we've hit the middle ground when both sides are slightly unhappy and they're like, well, you don't have it completely right from our perspective, but you found enough of that overlap between both sides that we can kind of reach a common ground and move forward. I don't know where that source is in some of the public debates that are, things that fall outside of at least what my expertise would be in terms of like conflict resolution and helping parties find a program to resolve mass conflicts. But I do know it's about finding enough neutral sources and building your own, theory of the case, and realizing success has been achieved when both sides are slightly unhappy with what you've determined, but they can see the logic and kind of the rationale and the overlap.
So are you saying that you don't go get your sources from TikTok? Is that what you're saying?
Nothing from cable news for me.
No cable news, no TikTok or Instagram. So let's move on to a different topic that I was excited about to ask you your thoughts on. That's AI.
Yeah.
I know you've had some experience with AI. AI is all the rage, right? Everyone's talking about it. Is it the technological advanced breakthrough of our generation that's never been seen before? Is it that? And then if it is, where do you see it going, and how will it be used for good? And what are the warning signs as well?
Yeah, so I've advised two companies in the space that are AI, kind of in the AI space and the legal space. And so kind of my knowledge of AI is really in the practical application of the kind of the legal space. But I think most people who comment on where AI can be transformative in business often look to law and medicine that are otherwise kind of cottagey industries where, in the use of like high subject matter expertise and barriers to entry because of that high subject matter expertise that is often associated with medicine and law, that, there can be a bit of a democratization and a lowering of that bar to access that subject matter talent through AI. And so let me give me a couple examples. There's a company called Pattern Data that I've had the good fortune of advising. And what they discovered is, like, in the legal space, that for decades in all this litigation, all these conflicts, and let's take something that involves like a medical harm, like a pharmaceutical product, and there could be tens of thousands of claimants related to this product that they're alleging harmed them. It used to be that nurses and lawyers would go through those documents, and in the process of resolving those claims, that could take 18 months to get through hundreds of thousands, millions of pages of documents and make sure that the interpretation of what is found in those documents is consistently applied. AI now does that in real life cases that we're involved in, involving tens of thousands of claimants. So that's shortening that time process of 18 months and millions of dollars of paying humans in the loop with high skill to do that to a matter of days. And so in the law, we're seeing it not in terms of like providing advice necessarily, but in terms of shortening the process where there's historically been kind of a high subject matter level expertise that needed to be repeated over and over and over and applied consistently across hundreds, if not thousands, of matters. So that's a great practical application where we're seeing it today, and it's just transforming our space. Kind of another area that also involves subject matter expertise is a company that I've founded and advising called Jane. And Jane, by the way, to do a callback to our original discussion, my mother recently passed from cancer, and her name was Jane Garretson, and she was this consummate learner and educator. And so we launched this product called Jane, which is an educator. And so in these mass legal matters that, again, hundreds of thousands of, or if not thousands of people with similar harm all have the same question of their lawyers, same question of the defendant, same question of any neutral administrator, just about how litigation works, how resolution works. That process used to be handled by call centers. It was polls that look to clients of lawyers as to what their biggest dissatisfaction is. It's the time it takes to get a response and the quality of the response. And so we've launched this product called Jane that basically federalizes those responses. So if there's 50 law firms involved with tens of thousands of claimants, and then all trying to share information consistently, Jane is make sure that those answers are not only provided in a accurate way to the first people that ask them, but then also gets predictive and says, well, if 5 or 6 plaintiffs are asking a question, then we can now predict that based off the demographic of the people that are asking those questions, we now predict that these people have the same question, even though they haven't asked it yet. And we're driving information and engagement in a proactive way to those people who fit the profile that have never asked the question before. And that process, again, is taking time. It's raising satisfaction. It's taking expense. It used to be that those questions had to be answered by doctors and lawyers and nurse practitioners. And obviously that's a very expensive proposition. And now they can answer it once, and now that can be federated across everybody that could possibly have those questions. So that's another great example of just how it's transforming an industry that has historically not been great at finding a way to share good information in a cost-effective and time-efficient way.
Yeah, those are great examples. Now, do you find yourself utilizing AI yourself just in your personal life?
Not so much. Well, I should say not so much. Where I use it now is to get kind of a first cut at, let's say, outside the profession that I'm in, where we use our own product. I do find it really fascinating to ask at a question and then explore the data sources from which those questions are derived. I find that fascinating, and it actually connects the dots of what kind of advice am I getting in life? You can ask AI and kind of the Google interface to it and get a response, but if you hit all the links, you can kind of know, did this come from a reputable source or not? And then I think in life it's helped me discover more reputable sources or sources of interest that I want to go and pursue for my own information and research.
Or did it come from a source at all, or just make it up?
Exactly.
I caught it making up stuff all the time. Still, I'm like, come on! I thought we talked about this.
No, that's exactly right. That's something we have to guard against in every profession we're using it.
Yes. So, outdoors wise, you've done a lot of things, like from the Iditarod trail, all that stuff. Like, what's the in your mind? And maybe you have some recency bias here, I don't know. What's been the most maybe life-altering or life-changing external event like that you've taken part in?
I've always loved cycling, and I grew up with my father at BMX tracks and racing bikes. And then I later reconnected with mountain biking as a way to just kind of exhale and kind of burn off stress. And in 2016, I had gone down this rabbit hole, as I often do, as you're trying to unwind at night and you're trying to get out of your email inbox from your professional life and find something to distract you. And I started researching these 3 great epic rides that are somewhat interconnected in North America, that are all done in a self-supported way on a mountain bike. And what I mean by self-supported, they call it bike packing. It's like you carry everything with you until you can get to a town or some place to resupply. And those great big epic races were the Great Divide, which is a mountain bike ride from Banff in British Columbia all the way down to the Mexican border. And that's a 2,900 mile ride, and people keep a tracker on you to kind of compete in the sense of how am I doing relative to other people who've done the adventure. The second is the Baja Divide, where you basically pick up where you stopped at the Mexican border and go all the way down to Baja, Mexico, or to Cancun on the Baja Divide, and that's a 1,700 mile. And then the ultimate one in terms of adventure is the Iditarod, where right before the dog sled that the Iditarod race is so famous for, there's a human-powered race. And you can actually take a mountain bike that's engineered with 5-inch tires. They call them a fat bike, and you can ride the Iditarod trail right before the dogs go. And that's by invitation. And so I did to qualify to do the Iditarod, I did the Great Divide in 2018, the Baja Divide in 2020. And then the glitch with the Iditarod is you have to race a 350-mile version of it twice before you can get invited to do the 1,000. So that odyssey for me that started with research in 2016 just ended last year when I finally got my invite to race the 1,000-mile full Iditarod on my bike.
Wow, that's now the 2 legs there, the initial legs. Are those solo or are they with people? Are you going on a group?
People on the Iditarod, they have kind of a grand depart as a group, but you're really on your own. You see some of the same individuals in the villages you go through for resupply, but by and large, every day you're just feels like you're kind of in the middle of a ping pong ball, just white on all sides and pedaling your bike through whatever weather you may approach. And you do see everything on that ride. I mean, from negative 40-degree temperatures and 65-mile-an-hour winds to just absolute beautiful days, But it's I think the most epic adventure somebody could go on.
So how long did it take you?
The 1,000 miles on the Iditarod took me just under 18 days.
Wow. Okay. And that's just you and your bike, and you got the gear, and
you got the gear. And
how much do you go to clip before you had to shut it down?
it really depends on what the terrain has for you in store for you. There's about 350 miles of it where you're actually riding on the frozen Yukon or other similar great rivers through Alaska. And those tend to move a little faster. And then there's parts where you're going up through the mountains and the hills, and you're pushing your bike. So the goal was to you try to get as close to 50 or 60 miles a day if you can. But you might imagine that might be 100 miles one day when you're riding on the river, and 20 miles the next day when you're pushing your bike through, up and over a mountain.
And you're completely by yourself.
You are. You'll run into people because the resupply points are aggregating sites for everybody that's doing the race. So there's about 7 villages that most people ship supplies to. And so by the time you get there and you can get your resupply, you tend to power down for a few hours and work on your bike and your packing and your nutrition. But you see people generally every day at some point.
What I'm curious about on those types of adventures is I've talked to a lot of folks who've done not quite that extensively, but something similar. Usually there's some self-discovery.
Yes.
That takes place. I'm just curious from your perspective, what were some of because this is fairly recent. This isn't something you did 30 years ago. Like, this is pretty recent.
Yeah. I think there's a couple things. One is like, you feel like, if I were to sit with a therapist and they would unpack it, I have a feeling what they would say is it's kind of this chip on your shoulder of not wanting to get too comfortable in life. And I think good adventures and risk, if approached correctly, can, keep you focused and sharp. And so I've always been a big believer too in that, in business and your personal life. And I don't know if he actually said it, but it's often attributed to T.S. Eliot, is that comment of only those who will risk going too far can possibly find out how far they can go. That kind of attitude in life. And I like that as what is possible. And the other thing I really like about it is there's a lot of lessons you take from business that for me apply in these adventure settings. Like when I am out on a trail like that, kind of my guiding mantra each day is, that I have to be methodical about observation, right? And so, and I tell people there's many, many people that are great or much better athletes. I think I'm an average athlete that's really good at being methodical, if that makes sense. So observing data about the terrain and doing all the possible studying I can about every mile that's out there, observing weather and understanding that in my mind, if it gets to this degree of temperature, here's the exact clothing and gear I have to have on to be comfortable, and really researching all that. And then kind of, if you're methodical about observing the terrain, the weather, your gear, and then it's kind of this idea of engaging, right? Is one of the things that I think people screw up with in business as well, is you create this wonderful strategy, right? And then, it's what did Mike Tyson say? It's everybody has a strategy till they're punched in the face or something like that. Right. It's the same kind of concept. Is all right, I'm going to observe it all, but now I got to engage with it. And you have to engage with whatever assumptions you made originally, and then see if the conditions you're encountering are actually what you assumed you would encounter. And then with that, have the courage to adapt, right? So what I learned about these adventures is you can't even chunk it up in days. You have to chunk it up into 30-minute increments and be all right, something's going to change in the next 30 minutes. And am I pressing enough to identify it? And then am I, comfortable enough in myself to adapt and change? And it sounds so silly, but I even wrote it. I write this on my on the data sheet I carry on my handlebars, and so I can look at it every day as a reminder of like, am I observing? Am I engaging with those assumptions that led to, kind of what I thought I would be doing today? Have I adapted throughout the course of the day? And at the end of the day, like persevering. And what I mean by that is like, your emotions and, are so controlled, especially at my age, like, like you get tired, you get run down, your nutrition's off, your sugar's off, like, remembering to have, faith and confidence that if I am methodical about that whole loop of, observing and adapting and, engaging, if I just keep looping it, I'm going to be okay. So that's a long-winded answer, but that's how I really break up the journey, and I break it up into hour segments.
No, I'm writing a note here because what you're giving us is not just about how to go do the Iditarod. It's about how to do life. It's how to do entrepreneurship. It's how to do being a great father and a great husband and a great wife or mom. You started with earlier with like this degree of curiosity and preparation, which is critical skill sets. But then when you're in the fray, this observe, engage, adapt, persevere. I mean, that is a recipe for success in anything in life. It's just so, I guess it's probably so very potent and latent when you're in the middle of nowhere and you know that if you don't do these things, survival goes down, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the things that when I talk about to groups like the experience on the Iditarod in particular, like I'll ask people, like, what do you think is the reason that, 75% of the people that start the race, don't finish? And, most people would probably throw it into three categories. They're going to say like injury. They're going to say, a mechanical issue with the bike, or it's just outright fatigue. And none of those are close. The reason that most people don't survive like a winter adventure all boils down to what we call moisture management. And it sounds so silly, but what happens is they allow themselves to get hot and they create sweat and moisture on their body. And then you stop whatever activity was creating that moisture, that sweat, and then you freeze. It's just common physics, right? Like you got moisture on your body and it's -40. And so this methodical thing comes in with like, well, the way you do that is you have to be mindful of like, at every hour or every 30 minutes, like doing a self-assessment of like, hey, am I running a little hot? Even though it's -40 and you're getting frostbite on your hands and nose, it's like you're unzipping like zippers on your, vents on your jacket. And even to the point of like the last 30 minutes of your ride, even in those crazy weather conditions, it's not uncommon for people to go all the way down to a t-shirt just to let the wind blow the moisture off their body and then put all that stuff back on and warm up. And if you don't have confidence in that process, because it's so antithetical to like your desire to survive a cold situation, you won't survive it, And so I do think there's some great carryovers in business of that loop, right? Of like, observing, engaging, and adapting.
And that's the execution of the strategy. And I think that I wouldn't know to do that if I hadn't been curious enough to do the preparation to understand what I needed to do before I got in the fray. And then again, these things translate so many areas of our lives, and they're just so obvious when you hear somebody talk about them in those settings, but they really do apply on a micro level in just about every area of our life. And I think I see a lot today. The adaptability one is interesting to me because so many people get so kind of locked into a mode in whatever it is they're doing. And if they lack adaptability, they can go down that wrong path out of sheer either pride or stupidity too long, and they've missed it, right? They've missed the moment.
To me, it's been the biggest challenge in all these professional endeavors as well, is is learning when to call that audible and scrap the best considered plan you think you've ever made with your colleagues and realize that we got to go down a different route.
That's great. All right, as we're wrapping, what are you most excited about coming up in the next 1 to 3 years? It could be personal, professional. Like, what's next on the list? Like, what are you excited about?
In particular, there's a business we've started called Burnbright that is a legal process outsourced business based in Guatemala and the United States. And it started as a nonprofit where my family and I had started a business, the nonprofit business, that where we were educating leaders in kind of austere environments, so like the Dominican Republic, Haiti, Mexico, India, and learning to meet people where they're at and give them not all the information that somebody needs, like to be an expert, but the information they need to execute a job better and to better themselves for whatever lies ahead of them in terms of progress within like improving a nonprofit or improving the work they're doing in a field, which in the field, like to build communities or do whatever is associated with kind of that nonprofit work of community building. We started that business to really say there's so many great nonprofits in this world. They're built by people often with tremendous heart and tremendous drive, but they're not surrounded by people who've been there and done that and scaled a business. And so we brought that to those environments with nonprofits for several years. And then we actually decided, what if we take that same teaching and go into an environment like Guatemala, where there's this tremendous workforce of young, high school, college educated individuals who just don't have opportunities like we have here in the United States. And we took that same microeducation approach and began to teach job skills, and actually started to do it within an industry like this legal process industry that I know so well. And it's just been awesome. It's putting together things that matter in my life, like ministry, like nonprofit community building, and just like teaching people great ways to make a living wage. And we've kind of put all that into a melting pot in this operation in Guatemala, and it is just flourishing. We're seeing young men and women reach their potential and get themselves on a path to just great careers, and they're interacting with our U.S. staff and with our clients, and it feels good. I don't know how any way to describe it. It feels like. You look back, and I know there's all kinds of adages and people have said it, but like when you look at decisions you've made in your life and you're able to see all these dots connect and into something where you're like, I would have never seen this coming. And I'm so excited to see where it goes in the next few years. And not from a financial standpoint, although the business is doing great. It's the fact that so many people are being impacted by it. The people in the United States are being impacted by the great work that these folks are doing, and the people down there are being impacted by the job creation and the career opportunities. I just love it.
That's awesome. What a great kind of culmination of all of your experiences. So where can folks learn more about you and things you've been involved in and things you're passionate about? Is there anything where can they go?
Professionally, our website is garretsonteam.com.
Okay.
And that pretty much is the site from which everything else launches.
Flows.
And yeah.
That's great. So garretsonteam.com. Anything else that you want to point folks towards today?
I think that's it. We've got several things we mentioned here today, but I think all of them are kind of the launching point of all the different endeavors we're involved in are all contained on that site.
Well, your journey is one that I look at with admiration, and I learn from. I knew a little bit about you, but I think even today, such a deeper level. I think if you're listening to this episode and you didn't take notes and you didn't pick up the nuance between the subtleties of all the different things that we learned from Matt, then go back and listen to it again, because there's so much gold in there just in your journey and you sharing your journey. So thank you very much for being on the show, and
Absolutely.
we'd love to stay in touch with you and keep up to speed on the next adventure that you're going to do.
Yeah, whatever it might be. Oh, thank you, Jeff. I really do appreciate it.